April 7th, 1945. The southern sky over Okinawa flickered with smoke and steel. Beneath a jagged cliff, inside a damp Japanese command bunker, Captain Otto Rem adjusted his glasses. A Luftwaffe liaison sent by Berlin. His job was to observe, report, and advise. But in this moment, he was simply stunned. Outside, the earth rumbled. Kamikaze fighters roared overhead like banshees. Rem ducked instinctively as one buzzed just 20 meters above the ridge. A Silver Zero, engine screaming, nose fixed on an American destroyer. Seconds later, a plume of seawater. It missed. The bunker fell quiet. A Japanese major exhaled, still gripping his binoculars. "He's not coming back," he muttered. Rem glanced toward the horizon. The carrier group was intact, tighter, more prepared than any naval formation he'd seen in Europe. And then something happened. From the cloud bank, a single American Hellcat twisted through the smoke like a ghost, pulling a maneuver that no manual would dare explain. It cut between two diving Zeros, flipped backward, and lured them both into their own side's anti-air fire. A flare of impact. Then silence. Rem blinked. No one spoke. "He's not coming back," the Japanese officer repeated, now staring into the distance. But Rem kept watching that sky, haunted by a single question. If he didn't make it back, then why did it work? He didn't know it yet. But that pilot, that one impossible maneuver, had just rewritten the laws of this war. 6 weeks earlier, late February, 1945. The cherry blossoms had not yet bloomed in Kyushu. But the funeral drums at Kanoya Airfield beat daily. Each one meant another pilot, another prayer, another promise of glory. Lieutenant Hiroyuki Nagatsuka sat beneath a fig tree, wiping grease from his hands. His Zero had needed rewiring. Again, he didn't complain. His orders were simple: train the young, fly with the brave, and die if necessary. The wind was sharp. A new group of recruits stood trembling in formation. Most were 18. A few still wore school pins on their collars. Nakatsuka rose. His uniform clung to him, one sleeve patched, the other burnt from a prior mission. He looked them over. "You will strike the heart of the enemy," he said, "and you will not return." There were no cheers, only bows. From the shadows near the hangar, a man lit a cigarette. German, observing. Captain Otto Rem had arrived 3 days earlier on orders from Berlin. His task: evaluate Japan's kamikaze tactics. Determine whether such sacrifice warfare could be adapted in Europe. But, as he watched the boys walk silently toward their planes, each carrying a letter, a photo, a vial of sake, his stomach turned. This wasn't strategy. It was ritual. That night, Rem scribbled in his journal. They mistake death for doctrine. In Berlin, we build for victory. Here, they fall for symbolism. Yet even he could not deny their commitment. He had seen a kamikaze rip through a cruiser off Luzon. Nothing survived but twisted steel and American screams. Rem met with Colonel Ishihara, head of operations. The Japanese officer poured tea, calm and proud. "Our men do not fear death," Ishihara said. "Can you say the same of yours?" Rem sipped quietly. They fear failure more, he said. Which is why they win. The colonel smiled. You will see, he said. This time, we will drive them back. Outside, a fuel truck rumbled. A cherry tree, not yet blooming, shed brown leaves instead of flowers. 3 days later, the air would be thick with smoke, and Rem would learn what real industrial war looked like. But for now, he simply wrote, closed his book, and listened to the drums of boys already gone. March the 30th, 1945. Kanoya Airfield, 04:12 a.m. The fog came low, too low for this time of year. Captain Otto Rem stood outside the command hut, coat buttoned high, breath visible. The horizon was quiet, save for the idle chatter of mechanics and the low hum of fuel pumps. But something felt wrong. One of the Zero fighters wouldn't start. The ignition coughed twice, then died. Mechanic Fujimoto smacked the panel. Nothing. Inside the briefing room, Lieutenant Shiro Nakamura stared at a faded photograph of his family, mother, father, older brother lost in Burma. He blinked once, slipped it into his chest pocket. Nagatsuka entered sharply. Weather holds. We go. Rem leaned in. Your recon pilot never returned. No map correction? The colonel waved him off. Irrelevant. Americans are primitive. They react, not anticipate. Rem frowned. On the map, a thick black arrow pointed directly at the center of the U.S. fleet, as if the enemy were frozen in place. At 05:02, engines roared to life. The runway glowed with lanterns. Kamikaze crews saluted. Some wept. Others grinned like actors at curtain call. Still, that fog. Overhead, a weather balloon launched. Within minutes, it vanished. Not drifted. Vanished. Rem turned to the communications officer. Where is the balloon? No response. A distant boom, maybe thunder, maybe something else. As the last wave of Zeros lifted into the sky, Rem remained alone on the tarmac, staring up. Something's wrong, he whispered. Inside of the radar shack, a technician adjusted dials. His hand trembled. He too had seen something, a shadow formation on the radar. It looked American, but it was where no ships should be. He started to report. The microphone crackled, then silence. By 25 a.m., the eastern horizon flared with gold. Above the Philippine Sea, the first formation of Japanese Zeros broke through the cloud layer, and the truth struck like cold steel. The American fleet was gone. In its place, scattered decoys, steel plates bobbing in the water, radar balloons tethered to drifting barrels. From a distance, it looked like a convoy, but as they closed in, no smokestacks, no deck crews, no movement. Lieutenant Nagatsuka signaled to tighten formation. His wingman's voice crackled. Sir, they're not real. Below, one kamikaze broke formation and dove straight into the sea. A pillar of water erupted. No explosion. Nothing. From a coastal ridge, Captain Otto Rem watched through binoculars, heart sinking. On the radio, Japanese command demanded new coordinates. But the Americans weren't where they were supposed to be. They were everywhere else. At 07:04, anti-aircraft fire erupted from the southeast, not from ships, but from hidden island batteries Rem turned, realizing too late. The American fleet had split, repositioned overnight, and masked their true presence with electronic jamming and floating deception. He wrote later, "They didn't meet us head-on. They moved like oil in water, invisible but everywhere. One by one, the kamikazes twisted mid-air, breaking discipline. Without confirmed targets, their sacred duty meant nothing. No glory, no purpose." In the confusion, Lieutenant Shiro hesitated. He banked left, just as a trail of flak tore through the cloud. His right wing vanished. He didn't scream. Nagatsuka steadied the line. "Adjust heading. Find the real fleet." But it was too late. The sea was a mirror, and the sky a trap. From the bunker, a Japanese colonel screamed for answers. Rem said nothing. He just watched as another plane spun downward, trailing smoke and cherry petals painted on its wings, vanishing into a sea that offered no reply. 07:29 a.m. From the north, cutting through smoke and cloud, came a single American Hellcat. It dove hard, engines screaming, silhouetted by firelight. Two Japanese Zeros locked on instantly, peeling from formation. Captain Otto Rem spotted it through his binoculars. The Hellcat was cornered, altitude dropping. No wingmen, no Egot. 1-0 fired, tracers flaring past the cockpit. The other climbed for an overhead cut. But then, something impossible happened. The American pilot yanked hard right, almost vertical, then stalled the aircraft mid-air. Not a panic stall, a controlled, precise tail dip. The Hellcat dropped backward, flipped, and fell beneath both Zeros, inverted. For 3 seconds, it hung upside down. Then the Hellcat rolled left, disappearing into a cloud bank. The Zeros followed, confused. A second later, both exploded in a burst of friendly anti-air fire. Their own gunners, fooled by angles, missed, and speed. Rem lowered his binoculars. He couldn't breathe. "That maneuver," he whispered. No German pilot would have dared it. No textbook even described it. A Japanese officer beside him cursed aloud. "It's forcery," he muttered. Rem's hands trembled. He pulled out his journal and scribbled. The sky betrayed them. But he bent the sky. Back in the air, the American pilot, Lieutenant Jack Stafford, pulled the level just above wave height. He radioed once, 2 down, still hunting. He never mentioned the stunt, never even slowed down. But on the ground, the myth was already forming. One man, one plane, had unraveled an entire squadron. And somewhere deep inside Otto Rem, a small part of him cracked. Because now he knew, this wasn't luck. This was something else. By mid-morning, the sky burned with the smoke of ruined wings. Captain Otto Rem sat in the rear of a mobile command truck, its walls vibrating with static and panic. Across from him, a Japanese intelligence officer laid out a folded chart. It was wet, torn, captured from a downed American courier plane. At first glance, it looked like a standard naval map. But then Rem leaned closer, and his breath caught. It wasn't just coordinates. Every Japanese airfield was marked, color-coded by activity, flight times, altitude paths, probable weather shifts. But that wasn't the part that froze his hands. Beneath each airbase were behavioral notes. Kagoshima unit, likely to overcommit. Kanoya wing, poor in cloudy conditions. Commander Ishihara prone to symbolic targets. Rem looked up. They studied us like we were animals. The officer nodded, shame flooding his face. There was more. Next to the supply lines, red arrows showed American fuel barge movements, 3 days ahead, carrier rotations, decoy timings, even psychological estimates of kamikaze reactions to missed targets. It wasn't a battle plan. It was a machine. They don't guess, Rem whispered. They predict. He turned the chart over. On the backside, a grid labeled red ball coordination. At every square, a dot. Every dot, a shipment. Every shipment, aligned with predicted attacks. They were never reacting, he muttered. They were waiting. He remembered the maneuver, that Hellcat's impossible flip. Now it made sense. It was planned. Not in the moment, not by instinct, but trained, modeled, executed by men who had rehearsed for variables the Axis had never considered. Outside, another explosion rocked the hillside. But inside the truck, the real detonation had already happened. Rem slumped against the wall, because in that moment, holding that map, he saw something terrifying. Not a superior enemy, a superior system. 10:41 a.m. The air above Okinawa had turned metallic. Burning oil streaked the horizon. Bodies fell slower than wreckage. And still, they launched more. Lieutenant Hiroyuki Nagatsuka circled high, teeth clenched, hands trembling. Below him, the waves shimmered with false targets and fire. His instruments were fogged. His radio, silent. All formation was gone. What remained were lone aircraft, drifting between smoke columns and radar traps. From the ridge, Captain Otto Rem saw the end coming in fragments. A Zero spiraled downward, its engine humming an eerie tune before slamming into a reef. Another broke mid-air from flak. No scream, no signal. Just falling steel. Inside the command tent, officers shouted, but no orders landed. Because the war in the air was no longer tactical. It was personal. Nagatsuka spotted movement on the water, a flat shape, gray, steady. It looked like a carrier. He banked. "I see them," he called. His co-pilot never answered. He dove. From 1,000 feet, the ship began to shimmer. By 600, it split. Not one carrier, but 3 shadows. Mirrored radar decoys laid out on synchronized rafts. Too late. He locked his eyes and whispered, "Tell my mother I tried." Impact, a flash, then spray. Back on the ridge, Rem dropped his binoculars. They shattered against stone. He fell to his knees, not from injury, but from knowing. They hadn't been outflown. They had been outbuilt. The battle had already ended, before the first plane took off. Later, in his diary, he wrote, "The sky collapsed, not with thunder, but with understanding." Below, the remaining Zeros turned, unsure what remained. Fuel ran low. Hearts ran dry. One pilot wept openly. Another slammed his fist against the glass, screaming at ghosts. There would be no shrine for them. No songs. Only driftwood, oil, and silence. The command tent emptied. Even Colonel Ishihara, once iron and fire, walked into the brush alone, coat unbuttoned, blade discarded. And on the ground, Otto Rem sat in the dirt, head bowed. He whispered one line, just once. They didn't win because they flew better. They won because they understood what war had become. The battle had ended, but the proof of defeat kept arriving. From the cliffs near Yonabaru Bay, Captain Otto Rem watched a strange procession float ashore. It wasn't troops. It wasn't tanks. It was mail. American seaplanes, low and casual, skidded across the water like children skipping stones. No escort. No urgency. Their cargo, letters, magazines, ice cream. Ice cream. Japanese officers stood frozen. One whispered, "They bring dessert to a war zone?" Rem stepped forward. A downed American pilot, now prisoner, sat beneath a makeshift awning. He had a bandaged arm and a smirk too calm for a battlefield. Rem approached him. "Why?" he asked. "Why waste fuel on frozen cream?" The pilot sipped from a tin cup, wincing slightly, then answered, "Because we don't just fight, we deliver." Behind them, crates were being unloaded. Rem crouched beside one, stamped in bold red. Red Ball Express, every crate labeled by time. Not date, time. He opened one. Inside, tools, chocolate, spare aircraft parts, and women's perfume. Perfume? For the nurses, the pilot said. Back on the carriers. Rem stared into the box like it held prophecy. He had once inspected a German supply line outside Leningrad. 60 miles of horse carts, mismatched tires, hand-cobbled fuel drums. This was not supply. This was culture. At the edge of the bay, more seaplanes landed. One carried only sacks of Coca-Cola concentrate. Another offloaded a jukebox. The war, Rem realized, was no longer fought in formations or dogfights. It was fought in rhythm. And America moved like jazz. He returned to camp in silence, stepping over wreckage and prayer flags. In his notebook, he wrote, "We built shrines to death. They built runways for life." The deeper Otto Rem looked, the more terrifying it became. He was granted access to a captured American logistics manual, soft-covered, smeared with grease and sugar. It read less like a war document, more like a user manual for a machine. Every part, every movement, every soul, replaceable. The diagrams were brutal in their elegance. Aircraft built in modular blocks, wings, engines, cockpits, all swappable in hours. Standardized bolts, interchangeable fittings, one wrench to service 20 models. Rem traced a line with his finger. Detroit makes the frame. Kansas builds the wings. California assembles. In Germany, he remembered, each Messerschmitt was sacred. Crafted, tuned, personalized, lose one. And you lost a pilot, a mechanic, a hand-fit machine. But here, lose one, build 5 more. He flipped the page. A side note. Designed for failure. Manufactured for replacement. Pilots instructed to eject, not die. The system encouraged survival. Encouraged efficiency over honor. Built for the war to continue, not to mourn. Across the page. Photos of women welding frames, children rolling tires. Lines of black and white soldiers unloading crate after crate. No titles, no hierarchy, just motion. Motion with purpose. Rem stood from his desk and looked around the Japanese camp. 5 different vehicle models. 2 were broken. No parts matched. Horses still carried ammunition to the front. And somewhere across the sea, an American teenager pressed a button that would build a wing in 6 minutes. He remembered what the downed pilot said. We deliver. Now he understood. They didn't just build more, they built smarter. They had accepted war, not as a glory, but as a system. And that made them unbeatable. Rem closed the manual and exhaled. We measure victory in bravery. They measure it in throughput. The war was no longer about courage. It was about design. The final numbers arrived like funeral bells, cold, precise, undeniable. Over 3,800 kamexis were launched during the Battle of Okinawa. 36 American ships were sunk. 36. Otto Rem did the math in his head. That meant over 100 pilots died, for each vessel destroyed. And many of those were transports, not warships. Few ever reached a carrier. He flipped through a captured American logistics report, not classified, not hidden. They had printed it in stars and stripes like it was nothing. 2 million gallons of fuel burned every week, just to mislead kamikazes. Fake fleets, radar balloons, roaming destroyers with no mission but to draw fire. A German general once told Rem, a gallon of gasoline is more valuable than a soldier. The Americans? They burned oceans of it, just to confuse their enemies. A footnote caught Rem's eye. Expendables deployed on 5-day rotation. Average airframe survival, 3.2 sorties. Not pilots. Planes they planned for loss. They embraced the cycle. He thought of Lieutenant Jack Stafford, the man in the Hellcat. Pulled an impossible stall. Killed 2 enemies with their own flak. He wasn't a legend. He was a node in the system. And that terrified Rem more than any ace with 100 kills. He turned to the rear of the document. A simple chart. Germany, 34,000 aircraft, produced in 1944. United States, 96,000. And yet, it wasn't the total that crushed him. It was a sentence, scribbled in pencil, in the margin of a captured notebook. They don't care if I die, as long as the blueprint lives. Rem folded the page and looked up at the ocean. Burning wrecks drifted on the tide. Cherry blossoms floated between oil slicks. The pilots were brave. The missions were sacred. But the math had no soul. The Americans didn't win by flying better. They won because they never flew alone. They were part of something far greater. A system that did not sleep, did not cry, did not forget. Rem whispered, "He's not coming back, but America will." Again, and again, and again. 30 years later, Huntsville, Alabama. The museum was small, quiet. No crowds, no film reels. Just a polished floor and the hum of air conditioning. Captain Otto Rem, now white-haired and cane-bound, moved slowly past glass cases filled with propellers and flight jackets. He stopped in front of one, a dark blue flight suit, faded at the seams. Above it, a plaque. Lieutenant Jack Stafford, United States Navy Air Corps. Defender of the impossible. Rem stared at the helmet. The same model. Same straps. Same number, etched into the chin piece. He remembered that sky, the stall, the flip. Though since after impact. A curator approached, young, polite, unaware of who stood before him. "Most visitors pass this one by," the man said. "He died on his third mission. Took down 2 before he went." Rem didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a yellowed envelope. Inside, a single photograph. 3 Japanese pilots, 1 German observer, all smiling under the cherry trees. One of them, Lieutenant Nagatsuka, had signed the back. Rem placed the photo gently beneath the display glass. Then beside it, a single white flower. Not a cherry blossom, a daisy. He stepped back, looked once more at the helmet, then whispered, "You died, so we could see." Outside, the wind rattled the flagpole. Children laughed in the parking lot. Inside, the ghost of a system still echoed. Not in engines, not in uniforms, but in what it built and what it left behind. Rem turned toward the exit, stopped once more at the doorway. He didn't say goodbye. He had already said enough, in silence.